Right, ladies and gentlemen, what I'm going to try and talk about is about the need for urgent reform in our prisons. The reason why I need to talk about this is because our scriptures as Christians teach us very clearly that we should be concerned for those in prison, particularly the church in prison. It says this in places like in Hebrews 13:3, where it says, "Remember those who are in prison as though in prison with them, and those who are mistreated, since you also are in the body." It says in Psalm 69:33, "For the Lord hears the needy and does not despise his own people who are prisoners." So, JC, bro, could you maybe go and talk with them? So in terms of scriptural principles, guys, in terms of scriptural principles, God has a concern for his people that are in prison. And as we as Christians who are called to reflect his heart, we are also supposed to have a concern for those that are in prison. However, there is a problem developing within the British prison system. And so the MP, Robert Jenrick, has raised awareness about this, and it is about the Islamist prison gangs operating in the prison system. I read from the Conservative and Reformer Post. It's a conservative journal, goes out to conservative-minded people. It says the following: calling for urgent reform, the former immigration minister laid out a series of measures, including overhauling Rule 46A to make national security a top priority, cutting back judicial interference in the operation of prison decisions, expanding the use of separation centres to isolate radical elements, and most critically, protecting prisoners who refuse to submit to extremist influence. Read that as Islamist influenced. Move closer. Now, it goes on. Mr. Jenrick's comments are likely to ignite fierce debate in Westminster, where concerns over Islamist radicalisation in prisons have been steadily mounting from the Conservative benches. Critics of the current system have long argued that extremist inmates use religious cover to recruit vulnerable prisoners, enforce control through intimidation, and plan future attacks from behind bars. The point that this article is trying to talk about is the fact that in our prison system right now, there is almost a free-for-all occurring where Islamist gangs are bullying and harassing and attacking those who are not Muslim inside the prison. Resultantly, this has led to forced conversions of people inside prison to Islam. It has resulted in particularly committed Christian prisoners being put in isolation wings inside the prison system, and Muslim gangs controlling entire wings of the system and establishing mock ad hoc Sharia courts to govern how that wing is run. Those who are not Muslim can be attacked if, for instance, they should disturb the Friday prayers in some way by maybe playing their TV too loud or shouting too loud. Christians will be harassed if they display their Christian faith in terms of a Muslim wing or in the presence of too many Muslims. Now let's be clear, as we read in the Bible, God has a concern for his people in prison. And the apostles teach us that we should remember the Christian prisoner like we are in prison, because we are all part of the body. Please move in, guys. Now, ladies and gentlemen, this problem is developing for a number of different reasons. Partly it's because of underfunding of the prison service. It isn't receiving enough funding. It's partly because there has been an intellectual snobbery that has swept the establishment, that has decided that it's best to run our prisons with graduates rather than ex-cops from council estates or ex-soldiers from council estates, because it's preferable to have pen-smart people rather than street-smart people running not just our prisons but also our police. The reality is that has meant that we have lost a lot of experience amongst the screws, amongst the prison guards. Not that they like to be called guards, I don't think. This has resulted in inexperienced prison guards who are too young, too inexperienced, not confident enough, not strong enough to stand up to these Islamists, being outsmarted by them, intimidated by them, and thus cowering from them, giving them a free run of our prisons. Furthermore, we've had interference by political correctness. The state, because it will not pick a side religiously, will not say that Islamists are a problem. It will just say radicalism is a problem. But how then can you distinguish between Islam and Islamist? The state has said that once a prisoner is in prison for one offence, the prison then has to build up evidence that a certain prisoner is radicalising, so they have to reinvestigate them, build a case against them before they can act, which results in prisoners being able to go on again and again, year after year, before the prison system actually does something about their radicalisation efforts. Political correctness is killing our security. Our prisons are becoming a hotbed of recruitment and training and indoctrination to Islamist ideology. And the state, because it is liberal, cannot think what to do about it and doesn't try to do anything about it. And when it does try, it acts like soy liberals. In other words, the problem is individualistic, it's not collective, it's not cultural. But the problem is the grip of the Islamist gangs in our prisons is now a culture. It used to be amongst prisoners that if you had murdered a child or you raped a woman and you went to prison, the other prisoners would hand out their other forms of justice to you. Nowadays, if you're a paedophile or a rapist, or you kill children, you just go into prison, say your shahada, and then the Muslim gang protects you. Well done, Islamists. You've just created that Islam is the hotbed for every paedophile, rapist and child murderer in our prison system. That's who you're managing to recruit. Now, ladies and gentlemen, the problem gets worse. Because our state is effectively neutral on the subject of religion, we also have the issue of Islamist chaplains, prison chaplains, who under the guise of being a Muslim chaplain are using their position and authority to push away any good Christian ministry from the prisons, ensuring that only the Church of England, and thus a guarantee for ineffective work, is done inside our prisons. Thus the box is ticked without any threat to the progress of Islam in our prison system. The idea that our prisons have a system of law running the wings should be something horrific to us. Last year, 20 odd Christians took the Home Office to court for failure to protect them from harm from Islamist gangs. This is a real problem that is going on in our prisons, and our liberal, secular, soy, Guardian Easter reading, BBC loving class don't want to do anything about it because they're more worried about their carbon footprint, to be concerned about the life of prisoners. And also, lots of conservative voices don't want to have compassion for prisoners because they think that they are getting what they deserve. Trust me, nobody deserves Islam.
Yes.
Nobody's that bad. So, what can we do about it, ladies and gentlemen? The first step of a solution is that the state has to stop being neutral. The state has to have as public policy that it seeks to convert its prisoners to the Christian faith by finding and identifying good Christian prison ministries, funding them and supporting them. Secondly, that the prison service starts to recruit prison guards that know how to bully the bully. Because as everybody knows, and as we've demonstrated in this corner, that when you stand up to the bully, they back down. And that's what you do with bullies. You bully the bully. You break them down. You wear them out. You crush their spirit. And the prison system should purposefully identify every leading Islamist gang member and make their life miserable until they decide to change. And their change being becoming a Christian. We need screws that are big enough, tough enough and smart enough not to get cornered, and are big enough that when the Islamists act up, it's the Islamist that comes off worse. Thirdly, ladies and gentlemen, for the toughest cases and for within the prison system only, we need to bring back hanging.
I couldn't agree more.
Those that cannot be changed should simply be hanged. We do not need to tolerate Islamists. We should not tolerate Islamists. And if we cannot reform them, then let's simply get rid of them. Fourthly, the church in prison, until such a time that the state steps in and protects it, must organize itself as its own gang. And Christians in prison need to stick up for one another. And Christian prison guards need to help those Christians defend themselves. And all of us Christians outside of prison need to be doing all that we can to help the Christians in prison. By putting pressure on the Home Office, by sending in support to the prisoners in terms of letters of encouragement and visits, and creating pressure groups on the outside on their behalf. The only way that you can deal with a bullying mentality is you have to be tougher and harder than them. I understand that. Most of you understand that. The problem is, our elites who read The Guardian have never been in a fight in their lives. They've never dealt with a difficult situation. They've lived sheltered lives their whole lives, and they think that everything can be solved with another hug, with a bit more goop, a bit more goo, a few more validating words. But anyone who's ever lived in a tough area knows that that is not how you deal with a local yob. And that's what our prisons are full of. Local yobs who are found in a gang called Islam that they have found a way to be strong and protected. We need to take away that security from them. We need to make the cost of joining that gang higher than the benefits of being part of that gang. Anyone with a brain can understand that. Unfortunately, our Guardianistas cannot. So we must educate the Guardianistas because they're too slow and naive to come to these conclusions on their own. They're innocent children playing with guns. And we must take the guns away from them before they hurt themselves or anyone else. As Christians, I want to be clear. It isn't the particular job of a special ministry to help and care for Christian prisoners. Paul's command was to all Christians. That means whether you're involved in prison ministry or not, you must embody a concern for the Christian prisoner. It's not optional. It's not something you can defer to someone else. It's something you must embody in your own Christian life. Any questions? Go on.
You mentioned so you mentioned hanging, bringing back hanging.
Yep.
Essentially bringing in the death penalty.
Yes.
That can be quite a tough pill to swallow for a lot of voters.
Yeah.
How would you ease that into the political sphere?
I actually think if you put it to a vote, most people would support the death penalty for certain crimes. Now, the only difference is, I'm saying that the death penalty should only operate inside the prison. Only existing prisoners can qualify for the death penalty. And that one of the reasons why a prisoner could be hanged is for being an Islamist ringleader. You might also want to include that people that rape inside prison, because that happens as well. So that's my answer. And I actually think that a lot of people might support that.
So what you're saying then is that them that's been punished are still doing the worst of the worst, and you just need rid of, basically.
What I'm saying is we need a prison system. We need to reform our prison system so that our prison system is actually trying to reform prisoners. But the point about liberals is that they don't understand what reformation means. They don't understand what metanoia means, what repentance means. They think reformation is teaching a radical how to use a hammer, a chisel, a knife and a saw, and then sending them back into society with new ways to kill people. Because you've given them some new skills, but you haven't changed the way they think. Anyone who's had any experience in the army knows that the army uses pressure to change people, to change people's way of thinking. Prisoners are full of tough nuts. It needs to use pressure to change people. Pressure from the screws. Pressure from the state backing evangelists. Pressure from serious punishment for being on the wrong side of the line. I'm not a soy liberal. which means that I can think of solutions that are outside of the liberal box, that a liberal might find hard to swallow. If we create an environment that's tough enough, where the way to get out of the tough spot is to become a Christian, then you're going to see a lot more people becoming Christian. And then you can examine how genuine that conversion is over time. And if you don't think it's genuine, you don't have to factor in to a principle of early release. You can just let them live out their sentence in peace. But those that are spreading Islamist radical teaching in our prison need to be so scared of the consequences that they would only dare tremble it in a whisper. Whereas right now, what they do is they run around in a big gang, they beat the shit up out of people, knowing that there's not going to be any consequences. They tell prisoners, you've got an appointment tomorrow with 12 of us, and we're going to tell you why Islam's great, and then we're going to ask you at the end, in a very clear way, about what answer to give, about whether you agree about whether Islam is great. Of course you're going to say yes, and then they're going to say, well, does that mean you want to become a Muslim then? And of course, every weak man who doesn't want to get beat up by a mob of 12 takes his shahada, because that's what pussies do in prison. But, ladies and gentlemen, if it was the case that those 12 men knew that the screws could kick the shit out of them, and that they would all be hanged the next day for trying to do what they were going to do, they wouldn't dare do it. You know why? Because that's what pussies do in prison. So, ladies and gentlemen, the way you deal with bullies is you bully them. And what we've got to do as a society is stop bullying our Islamist bullies. And that needs to come from the state. Any other questions?
Well, I've got a question for you on my favourite subject, as you know. I'm currently on Tommy Robbins.
Sorry, questions on the topic.
It is on the topic.
Oh, all right, fair enough.
Well, no.
That was a good catch.
I definitely caught you out there.
All right.
I'm currently on Tommy Robbins.
Making loads of assumptions today.
And Tommy is currently in prison,
Yeah.
a civil prisoner.
Yeah.
And what's your views on the fact that he's in solitary confinement?
I'm sorry, bro, that's not actually on topic. I'll take questions at the end generally, but I just want questions on the topic of Islamist gangs operating in our prisons and our responsibility to Christian prisoners. Any other questions?
So since the state isn't involved in protecting Christians, what can Christians do if we find ourselves in prison?
You've got to form a gang. That is the only realistic option. It is the only realistic option, and then the prisoners themselves force the segregation. Because nothing will happen until it is forced. That isn't because I want that to be the situation. I'm just answering the question realistically. The prison service is underfunded, it's recruiting the wrong people, and the people that it's got haven't got the right experience or even sometimes the right motivation to protect Christian prisoners from this kind of harassment. So when the state fails, the church steps in. We do that with food banks and nobody's got a problem with it. We do that with Christian charities, nobody's got a problem with it. So why don't we do that on questions of security?
So as
Let someone else ask a question. Any other questions? Islamist gangs in prison and the church in prison.
I suppose gangs and Christians don't synchronise, do they?
The idea that gangs don't synchronise in prison. I don't know if any of you have ever been in a gang, but you'll often find that gangs think of their other gang mates as a family.
It's often like a family-run business. They operate like a family-run business. They feel a close brotherhood to one another, a close solidarity
for one another. Gang members who are really involved in their gang are willing to die for one another, fight for one another, lie for one another, steal for one another. I'm not validating those negative
outworkings. But are we saying that to be Christian isn't about solidarity, isn't about standing up for one another, isn't about protecting one another, isn't about caring for one another as a family? The reality is, we might want to call it a different name, but gangs and the church do have some synchronicity at certain levels of interface. Obviously, I'm not supporting the idea of Christian gangs going round beating people up willy-nilly to try and dominate. That would be unchivalrous. And a Christian man should be guided by the code of chivalry, which means you protect the weak. And if that weak man is another prisoner who's not a Christian, then you protect him from the Islamist gangs. Or maybe it's a Muslim that wants out of the Islamist gangs, and you take him under your shoulder. Christian gangs would be different from Islamist gangs, because Christians are guided by principles of faith, love and hope. Not dominance, supremacy and apartheid.
And so, if a Christian gang was operating by Christian values in the prison system, it would actually bring, I suspect, increased security, increased harmony, and increased stability to the prison system. Bearing in mind a Christian submits to the authority of the state.
Can you give us an example of a Christian gang?
So,
that's good.
Let me finish. And so, ladies and gentlemen, I'm not saying that this is the ideal situation. The ideal situation would be that the state gets hold of the prison system. But the truth is, right now, the state has lost control of the prison system, and our brothers and sisters are being harmed inside the prisons. And we should not ignore them just because they ended up in there because of some sin. Next question. Yep. Wait, did you ask the last one?
Yes.
No, wait, let someone else ask one.
It's related to your last one.
Let someone else ask a question.
Someone asked, I don't think he's here now, and give an example of a Christian gang.
Right, I don't have an example of a Christian gang. I don't think this has ever been thought of before or even discussed, because in the past maybe we never had to. But we've got to answer the question of how do we guarantee the security of Christians in prison when the state is not guaranteeing the security of Christians in prison? Let me ask you this question. If the state was not guaranteeing the security of your family, what would you do about it? If you knew that the state would not be there to protect your family, what would you do? And would you expect anyone to blame you for doing it? Well, aren't Christians a family to one another? Isn't that our family inside prison? Aren't they a family to one another? So shouldn't they organise to protect themselves? And if that is called a gang, then so be it. I would prefer it happen another way. I would prefer a competent government. I would prefer competent prison guards. But the truth is, we have neither. And so we must organise our own means of security within the law. Now, I don't know if gangs are legal or illegal inside the prison system. But people can't be stopped from just standing up for one another. And Christians should stand up for one another wherever they are in the world, and that includes inside prison. Next question. Now you can ask. So
you're going to meet violence with violence, and you're there, and therefore, once violence is meted out in response to these Muslim gangs, what's the response of the state on the Christian gangs?
right.
You know the answer. You know the answer. We know.
So, ladies and gentlemen, because of this Islamist violence inside of our prisons, if Christians started to defend themselves, here is exactly what would happen. The same has happened in Northern Ireland. The groups would simply be separated. And if the groups were separated, could the Islamists attack non-Muslims? Would the problem be solved? There you go. The state will not act because it is incompetently led, and it will not act until its arm is forced behind its back. That is a sad situation, but that is the situation that we're in. The point remains, for those that say, but what, these are Christians fighting. Well, let me ask you, if someone attacked your family, would you defend them? The law says that it is legal to defend yourself, including inside prison. Yes, there's a legal threshold, and so as Christians we should educate Christian prisoners about that threshold, because as Christians we should try to keep to the laws of the land. But when the state itself is not enforcing its own laws, as it is increasingly doing on a range of issues, then that means it places citizens in situations where they're forced to act because the state is not doing its job. Christians in prison need to be protected from Islamist gangs. And there's only two ways that is going to happen. They are either protected by the state or they protect themselves. And it is not a crime morally or legally to protect yourself from Islamist gangs. Right. Well, it already is happening out here. It's not a foreshadow, it is happening. The Islamists in this park tried for 4 years to bully all of us out. They tried intimidating us. They tried attacking us. They tried stabbing us. They prepared to come with assault rifles and shoot us. They tried to set us on fire. These are all real incidents. They tried sexually assaulting the Christian sisters. They racially abused us. They lied about us. They tried for 6 years to bully the Christians out of this park, and they failed. Because we Christians are not going to be intimidated by these Islamists. But the problem is, and the problem that you all need to recognize, is that with sufficient numbers, they'll just ratchet it up. So as a country, we have to make a choice. Do we crack down on them, or do we allow them to continue to build up their networks, to push their ideology? The state has to make a choice. Liberalism has failed. The state must choose to be an avowed muscular Christian state, and it must deal with the Islamists at the state level, with deportations, with hanging, with making them outlaws. The state and every country that cracks down on the Islamists always sends them running. You know why? Because the lions of Islam are only lions when they're killing the unarmed women and children. They're never tough when it comes to fighting armed men. They're always cowards and they always lose. They're not strong except
by your weakness of mind, your weakness of heart, your weakness of strength. That's how you win. But right now, we're all separated. The state is cowering in a corner saying, please don't bully me. I'll be nice. I'll chuck you things. in the hope of placating this growing existential threat, and all the while the Islamists take what you give them and then demand more. How about we just ban halal, or ban the adhan being blasted by a megaphone from the minaret? How about we say that pushing Islam is a prisonable offence?
Because, make no mistake about it, under Sharia law, that's what they will do to Christians. So they'll complain it's Islamophobia when we suggest to do it to them, but they will want to do it to us. And the thing is, a lot of us are not awake to that fact. A lot of us are still daydreaming that we live in this fair play society. They're not playing fair. You need to recognize that. They're not playing by your liberal rule book. You need to recognize that. They're not people that can be bartered with or traded off. You either crush them or they crush you. I, for one, will not be a dhimmi. So that kind of tells you what my choice is. Yeah? And we do it legally. We use the law. We use the state to do it. We work within the system of laws.
Close the borders
So,
to prevent World War III.
any other questions?
Close the borders.
Is this situation that's happening where Muslims and non-Muslims in prison?
Sorry?
This situation that's happening in the UK where Muslims are converting non-Muslims to Muslim Islam.
Yeah.
Is that also happening in any other countries outside the UK? And if so, is there any successful sort of groups of Christianity that are succeeding?
Now, an interesting stat that I recently read, and I don't remember exactly the stat, so I'm just going to give you the synopsis, was across 16 prisons, they made a mark of how many people had converted to Islam and how many people had converted to Christianity across 16, the same 16 prisons. Now, I'm going to make up the next two numbers because I cannot remember for the life of me what the actual numbers were, so these are more symbolic than actual of what the report said. But it was something like 265 people had converted to Islam. Bearing in mind that Islamist gangs are going around literally intimidating and harassing people to convert to Islam. Do you know how many people converted to Christianity in those same 16 prisons? 216. In other words, without the intimidation, without the harassment, Christians were still keeping track with the Muslims in terms of making converts. That tells you the difference between Islam and Christianity. Tells you that given a free choice, Christianity would come out on top. And the Muslims know that. That's why they have an apostasy law. Even one of their own scholars said that without the apostasy law, Islam would collapse. And we know that that's true. Because lots of Muslims are becoming Christians, because Muslims have lost the apostasy law, and Muslims don't feel as afraid to become Christian. Even in this crowd, I know someone who's from a Muslim family who's become a Christian. I know someone in this very crowd. And the Palestinian Ali, who doesn't believe in Muhammad, he's a Palestinian, clearly with a name called Ali. He was from a Muslim family, but he's saying he doesn't believe in Islam. So lots of Muslims are leaving Islam right now.